The Family Values Bathroom Chronicles. Harold Thompson had always prided himself on being a man of family values. He voted against gay rights, led the charge for protecting traditional marriage, and never once wavered in his belief that marriage was between one man and one woman. He even had a bumper sticker that read, "God, Guns, and Family," a bold statement of his unshakable moral compass. But as Harold would soon find out, no amount of red, white, and blue bumper stickers could shield him from the truth. It all started with one fateful trip to a truck stop restroom. There, Harold, with his freshly pressed slacks and crisply ironed shirt, had no idea that a simple bathroom break would unlock a secret he had worked years to bury. As he zipped up, the bathroom door creaked open. A pair of eyes met his, eyes that held more than just a glance of fellow restroom goer. They were the eyes of a man who didn't care about what Harold stood for at town hall meetings. No, these were the eyes of someone who just wanted to know what Harold really stood for. And thus began the most unlikely and utterly hilarious chapter of Harold's life. The one where his secret identity was forged not in a voting booth, but in the far more questionable confines of public restrooms. But before that, Harold had everything figured out. He was a beacon of moral righteousness. That was until he got hooked on something stronger than political conviction. The pull of the men's bathroom at a truck stop. The Family Values Bathroom Chronicles. Harold Thompson had always prided himself on being a man of family values. He voted against gay rights, led the charge for protecting traditional marriage, and never once wavered in his belief that marriage was between one man and one woman. He even had a bumper sticker that read, "God, Guns, and Family," a bold statement of his unshakable moral compass. But as Harold would soon find out, no amount of red, white, and blue bumper stickers could shield him from the truth. It all started with one fateful trip to a truck stop restroom. There, Harold, with his freshly pressed slacks and crisply ironed shirt, had no idea that a simple bathroom break would unlock a secret he had worked years to bury. As he zipped up, the bathroom door creaked open. A pair of eyes met his, eyes that held more than just a glance of fellow restroom goer. They were the eyes of a man who didn't care about what Harold stood for at town hall meetings. No, these were the eyes of someone who just wanted to know what Harold really stood for. "Hey there, partner," the stranger said, a slow grin spreading across his face. The man had rough hands, a weathered look, and the unmistakable scent of diesel fuel and sweat that Harold had only ever associated with truckers, and now, apparently, himself, Harold, for a moment, forgot how to breathe. His gaze darted to the floor, then quickly back up to the man's eyes, trying to ignore the fact that his pulse was racing in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just the fear of being caught in a public restroom. No, there was something else. Something inviting. "Just using the bathroom," Harold muttered, his throat dry. Nothing more. The stranger's grin widened, and he stepped closer. "You sure about that, buddy?" he asked, his voice low but full of intent. The man's eyes flicked to the stall behind Harold. It was an unspoken invitation, a signal Harold had learned to read all too well after spending too many nights alone in his thoughts. It was a move he couldn't resist. He tried to remind himself of his principles, the values he stood for, but the voice in his head grew quieter with each step the stranger took toward him. Harold had spent years railing against the very idea of such behavior, talking about protecting the family unit, about keeping men and women in their traditional roles, about doing the right thing. And yet here he was, about to walk into a bathroom stall with a man he didn't even know. "Look, I don't," Harold began, but the stranger was already moving closer, his breath hot against Harold's ear. "You don't have to say anything," the stranger interrupted, his voice husky. "Just come with me." And in that moment, Harold realized that sometimes the call of nature wasn't just about relieving yourself. Sometimes it was about giving into something deeper, something more primal. He glanced over his shoulder, making sure the bathroom was empty, then nodded, his hand trembling as he followed the stranger into the dimly lit stall. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and just like that, Harold's carefully constructed world of family values and political speeches crumbled around him. Inside the stall, the stranger's hands were all over him. Harold stood frozen at first, uncertain, but as the man's lips found his neck, a strange sense of freedom washed over him. It was like stepping into a completely different reality. A reality where he didn't have to be the moral crusader, the pillar of virtue. He could just be Harold, the man who wanted to be touched, who wanted to escape the pressure of maintaining a spotless image. Your pants are a little too stiff for a truck stop, friend, the stranger teased, tugging at Harold's belt buckle. Harold's brain screamed in contradiction to what his body wanted, but it was too late. The man's hand was on his chest, and his lips were pressing against Harold's in a kiss that was as messy as it was inevitable. Harold tried to fight it, tried to remember his stance on family values, but the scent of diesel, sweat, and something more visceral had overwhelmed him. There was no going back. "What would your wife say?" the stranger chuckled, his hands roaming a bit too eagerly for Harold's liking. Harold froze for a second. The thought of his wife, the woman he had spent 15 years of marriage convincing that everything was just right, sent a flicker of panic through him. He quickly pushed it aside, telling himself this was just one mistake. Just one. He wasn't hurting anyone. No one had to know. But as the stranger's hand slid lower, Harold was struck by a terrifying realization. He had become the very thing he campaigned against, the very thing he spent his days voting against in state legislatures. In the silence of that truck stop bathroom, Harold wasn't a politician, a churchgoer, or a family values advocate. He was just a man, tired of pretending, tired of fighting his own nature. When it was over, Harold stood there, trying to steady his breath as the stranger buttoned his jeans with a satisfied smile. Harold, on the other hand, felt a mix of confusion and strange clarity. His heart raced, his mind a swirl of guilt. But there was also a hint of something else, something that felt a lot like relief. Harold dropped to his knees, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes briefly flicking to the floor. His thoughts swirled in a dizzying mix of shame and realization, as though the act had scrubbed away the layers of his public persona. For a moment, he was just a man. No labels, no political ideology. It was almost too much to process. God, what am I doing? Harold muttered to himself under his breath. Staring at the dirty tile floor, he quickly stood up, adjusting his clothes, and glanced at the man who was already heading for the door with a smirk. Well, that was something. The stranger said over his shoulder, "Take care, man." Harold stood there, alone in the stall, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. His mind raced, but all he could do was laugh, low, almost bitter. He had spent so many years talking about family values, about protecting his own image, his own moral high ground. But here, in this truck stop bathroom, he'd learned that sometimes the values you campaign for aren't the ones you end up living by. As he washed his hands, Harold couldn't help but wonder just how many others were out there, living the same contradiction. How many of them hid behind the same flag of family values, only to sneak away in the dead of night, looking for something different? Maybe I'll stick to the back road from now on, Harold muttered to himself, wiping his face one last time. Family values, indeed. Well, folks, looks like family values can sometimes be a bit more complicated than we thought, huh? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because here at Petals and Pride, we're all about embracing who we truly are, no matter what the world expects from us. So go ahead, subscribe, and remember, life's too short to not love yourself, and a little bit of irony along the way. Until next time, keep blooming, keep shining, and don't let anyone tell you who to be. Petals and Pride, where your story is always yours to tell. Stay true, stay proud, stay fabulous.